Which characters are likely to still receive some upgrades for the 30th anniversary? Now make sure you guys smash the link crap out of that subscribe button so you guys don't miss out more awesome content. We're going to start off with Yugi. Yugi as a character, and the fact that, they focused on the Rolad deck as kind of the first little piece to power up Yugi, leaves a few characters to still be explored. We got the Celtic Guard Slash, we got the Black Skull Dragon of Unity, but where's Valkyrion? One of the most powerfully broken cards to the ending of the series. Polymerization, which bridges, Yugi's deck together in so many possible, concepts. Gaia, the Fierce Knight, being one of the most powerful monsters, and honestly, the piece that actually makes the, Gaia, the Fierce Knight. I think people kind of forget that, Gaia was a stepping stone for that, and the fact that, we just don't actually have anything for Gaia, Curse a Dragon, or, Gaia, the Dragon Champion. Catapult Turtle, which, has broken through a lot of walls, though I do think Catapult Turtle's emphasis is a little bit less in the manga than that. There's also Arcana Knight Joker, and then Silent Magician, which I'm sure, we got the manga art, or we got the panel from the manga translated over for level 8 some time ago, but it doesn't really feel like a true Silent Magician-esque thing. Looking at everything that we've got here, Valkyrion and Silent Magician might be two big emphasis pieces, but it also depends on, how we're going to view little Yugi himself at a later part in this, distincting him from Big Yugi, because right now his deck is focusing on the Duelist Kingdom aspect, which leaves Gaia, Catapult Turtle, and Polymerization as some possible candidates to possibly be reworked to some sort of capacity. But do not count Yugi out at all. All right. Now, of course, we can't forget Kaiba, right? Kaiba being Kaiba is definitely... Kaiba's got a lot of cool tricks up his sleeve. For what we've seen. The Gyaku Tenno Megami, that normal monster that, you only really get the close-up of her face ever on the art. It's hard to tell that, there's more to her than meets the eye when they're not emphasizing, the close-up shots of her, which is crazy every single time. And then, of course, Le Jin. Le Jin has been a topic of, people wanting to see on the power-up train for a little while, and I still think that there's something that can be done with him. Blade Knight would also be a really easy one to retrain, considering the fact that Blade Knight just got a manga card. Tells me that, he is recognized as a very iconic card. Force Raider, who still is locked in vanilla purgatory, I do feel bad for him. Like, Force Raider is such a cool card, but at the same time, he has not really gotten a chance to shine, and it really stinks. There's also Enemy Controller, enter the Konami code and, take control of a monster was a really, really cool thing. And, Enemy Controller played a pretty critically important role within the, show itself. We did get the retrain for it a while back, but I think it would still be something really cool to see in here. And then, of course, Ring of Destruction being another pretty important card to Kaiba's arsenal. There's also Crush card, which I would love to see some sort of retrain on that. But as you can see, looking from, some of Kaiba's more notable cards here, there's a great selection for Konami to work with and still be able to do something, besides being named Blue Eyes White Dragon, Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and so forth. At this stage, I'm just kind of sick of every Blue Eyes getting fed to me. And then, of course, Joey Wheeler himself. Joey, you gotta remember, we now have the alternative storyline with Joey Wheeler. So now we can actually kind of paint more of a picture for Joey at this stage. The fact that Joey himself has the iconic Flame Swordsman missing from his deck. But I mean, there's still the emphasis on the Red Eyes Black Dragon. A card that, we could pass over to Yugi and then, eventually have to reduel Yugi to get our iconic boss monster back from him. The thing is, though, every time I look at Joey here and, we don't see the Flame Swordsman, it feels so weird because that's such an important card. But, we're building on the memories here of his deck. There's also Thousand Dragon and Baby Dragon. These two monsters are, in combination with the Time Wizard itself, I think we might see these next set, or at least a nod to the Thousand Dragon itself. Yeah, we already got the Black Skull retrain in Yugi's deck, so actually we do need to give Thousand Dragon some love here, because that card, it's such a big piece of his deck, and we got the Baby Dragon manga rare, so we better be doing something to power this up. From where I'm sitting right now, Joey's deck feels like the weakest. I mean, his deck was kind of I'm going to win all these cool cards and be able to use them, but he had his own iconic cards, which, Guilford the Lightning, which, by the way, if we don't emphasize Guilford the Lightning for that card being at the end before Joey passes away, that card was enough to keep him up, and I think he and Gearfried both deserve a special showcasing for their little power. Which brings us to Merrick. Hell Poemer is one of the first cards that comes to my mind that needs a solid power up from him. Being able to bury the Hell Poemer and then start sticking cards out of your opponent's hand. We've never had a card quite like Hell Poemer. I mean, we've had a Pointer of the Red Lotus where, you can creep into your opponent's hand and then, punch something out. But there's a lot of topic of conversation still to be had around the way that Hell Poemer was designed. Even if it just nets one card out of the opponent. They already printed Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast, which during the end phase just randomly loots a card from your opponent's hand. The game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is too inherently fast. I think a Hell Poemer retrain wouldn't be one of the worst things they could come up with. And then, of course, Lava Golem. They made the world's greatest Gallant Thief, which basically is a better Lava Golem. But Lava Golem is a very iconic card, versus Joey and versus Mai. The Lava Golem being able just to kind of start stealing away the life force for the way that it interacts, I think is really, really cool. There's also Makiora the Destructor, being able to effectively use a trap card in the very early stages of a duel is, inherently BS. Let's call it what it is. But I think that would be something that we could very easily see. And then, of course, Revival Jam needing a retrain. We do have Egyptian God Slime. I'm not going to sit here and discredit him and say, boo-hoo, he's so terrible, he's not modernized. But, Revival Jam himself and the interactions that he was able to work with, I think would be really cool. But you got to remember, that's just a spin-off of one of the many tools that Merrick had at his disposal. Merrick really did have some of the dirtiest cards that you could play. And then we have Mai. Mai has been a pretty interesting topic of conversation because her whole deck kind of is meant to kind of interact with each other and be able to do something. Let's look at Joey's modern deck, for example, where, Jinzo still kind of maintains its own original effect, but at the same time, it's a card that, has synergy underneath the helm of the Time Wizard. So, looking at Mai's cards, we kind of have to retrain a lot of the harpy stuff as a whole. As you have seen throughout modern era Yu-Gi-Oh! History, everything we've been doing with the harpies, the harpy archetype really expanded itself out. We got to see there were all of these different girls underneath the Gios of harpy name, channeler, harpist. There's a lot more to this deck, and especially they expanded it out even more in Rush Duel, showcasing this. But, going back into the manga in the 30th here, Mai's entire deck needs a lifeline. It needs an entire rework, and I think, making a new Harpy's Pet Dragon the Pet, for example, would be a good name for it. And make it, make new Harpy monsters that you could play as 3 ofs. Harpy Lady 1, 2, and 3, or, like Harpy Lady and then the Harpy Lady sisters. There are very iconically strong ways that you can bring Mai's deck up into the modern era and actually have it work out. So I do think these are highlights of what the characters themselves need to see. I'm looking forward to seeing something from each of them. But what do you guys think? Please leave a comment down below. Tell me what you guys think. I'll see your beautiful faces back here in the day, guys. Patrons, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.